today's World Insight, China's #1 central document for 2023 emphasizes rural revitalization and food security. Why is there a need for agricultural self-sufficiency in a globalized world? Here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. China unveiled its #1 central document for 2023 on Monday, outlining 9 tasks in promoting rural revitalization this year. The tasks include ensuring staple production of vital crops, strengthening agricultural infrastructure, supporting agricultural technology, and consolidating poverty alleviation results. With a rural population of about 500 million, China is putting their development issues at the center of the working agenda. So how is this country ushering in a new stage for rural development? For deeper insights, let's bring in our panelists. In Beijing, Zhang Chuanhong, Associate Professor from China Agricultural University. In Shanghai, Wang Dan, Chief Economist of Hang Seng Bank, China. In Beijing, once again, Li Yong, Chief Researcher at the BNC think tank. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Well, #1 document is always important at the very beginning of any year. And this time, Professor Zhang, I go to you since you're the agricultural expert here. What do you see are the most important highlights?
I think, this year's #1 document has been following the previous ones, but there are 2 things are highlighted. The first one is food security. The second one is rural revitalization. The document does not only provide directions, but also elicited the very comprehensive measures how to achieve food security and how to even implement the national strategy of rural revitalization.
Go to you, Professor Li Yong. Which area in the #1 document, as an economist, you're putting special emphasis on?
First, I would like to see how China is going to become an agricultural power and strong agriculture country. And the second thing is the emphasis to enhance the grain output by 50 billion kilos.
Okay, Ms. Wang, what about for you?
This document really highlighted the importance of being self-sufficient in feed. Because for China's food security, it's not about the staple food security anymore. It's mostly about feed, including soybean and oilseeds. So we have seen things like, seen language like we want to expand the planting area for soybean and for oilseeds, and we need to adopt a new technology to increase the yield of both plants. And that's something quite interesting to me.
Well, let's focus on some of the things you just mentioned, the self-sufficient and also self-reliant, a strong agricultural nation. These are the words being mentioned in the document. Tell me more, Professor Zhang, about that, what exactly it means.
Food security has always been at the core of China's agricultural policy. But from the last year's policy, we can see food security has been highly emphasized as one of the bottom line goals. I think this is due to at least 2 major reasons. The first one is the uncertainty in the global environment. Sure. Russia-Ukraine war pushed the food price into a high level, long-term pandemic, natural disasters like the earthquake, climate change, and disruptions in the global value chains. All these clearly indicate that we cannot rely on the global market for food supply. Second, I think, food self-sufficiency is always very important to meet the demands of Chinese people. And today's policy is different from the previous one, as mentioned by Ms. Wang earlier. Before we only emphasize grain outputs, but this year's document mentioned the establishment of diverse food system to meet the people's demand, like agriculture, animal husbandry, and others.
Go to you, Ms. Wang, since you mentioned these points as well. Soybeans, just an example, used to be, it seems it's continuing so far, a major source of trade cooperation between China and the United States. The two countries match very well, in fact, and it is also one of those very encouraging stories about how trade and economic cooperation could bring more stability and sustainability in important international relations. But now, of course, things are changing a bit. Tell me more, how do you see this example being reflected in the general No.1 document? Do we have to change the way of thinking and the way of how the system works?
I don't think there's a drastic reversal of the past policies. Because soybean is among one of the first agricultural food that was open to the international market. So in the past 5 years, about 85% of China's soybean consumption is from import. This is quite significant because China's entire animal raising industry is relying on foreign imports, and most of them are from Brazil and the US. When there's a geopolitical conflict or competition between different countries, usually agriculture will become the center of attention first. So for China, this is certainly a central point for cooperation, but also usually it's also a critical point for competition.
Mr. Li.
In the No.1 document, you see the expression of the importance of the soybean production. And that basically is going to put on the expansion of soybean output and the other oil seed output. And the interesting sentence is that China is going to reduce the use of soybean meal, and I think and the reliance on it. And of course, if you look at it in the context, that is going to be related to the development of other forests like alfalfa, kind of a grass, and kind of a silage. And those are going to be the substitute. I think, in the document, there's mention of a substitute and a reduction of soybean meal. And I think that may represent a shift of the focus in the animal feeds policy.
Ms. Zhang, very interesting, I think, this discussion going on. Please.
Yes, I agree. Diversify farming system. In China, in many places like Shandong, I noticed people started to use intercropping to plant soybeans with maize and other plants. This is on the one side, to reserve the soil, but on the other side to meet the national security. So there are quite a lot of interesting technologies were also applied, like precision agriculture.
This is exactly what I want to ask you, Professor Zhang. How much of the technologies are available right now, despite the fragmentation of our world today, and how much can China jump on right now in order to achieve the goals as said in the No.1 document? How available are those technologies? Where is China, mostly speaking? And how far can China go in order to apply those technologies?
The contribution of agriculture, the ratio actually has been increased greatly in the last 20 years. Now the ratio is about 61%, but there is still some gap between China and other countries, the developed countries especially, there are about 70 to 80%. But nowadays, I see the huge potential of the new technology, especially digital technology, in agriculture value chain development in rural China. We can see the spread of mobile devices, remote sensing services, and distributed computing are all improving farmers' access not only to production inputs, markets, and also financing and their own capacity building.
Right.
Cloud classroom is very popular. drones and live streams are becoming common practices for many people in rural China these days.
Of course, you know very well Juncao. That's one of those examples how technologies are being used and they change lives of the farmers and provide more options for China's agriculture and other related areas. So how do you see these kind of stories are likely to be, zero copied, quote unquote, but rather more widespread in China by using new technologies?
Yes, these technologies are very welcomed by the farmers in different places, and the potential. However, the potential is still needs to be further released. There is still a long way to go to reach a critical scale. I think providing financial support to improve these new technology, upgrade the current system, and build the capacity of farmers. I think these are the key three areas for government intervention to empower the rural community and contribute to agriculture development through technology-driven practices.
I see. Talking about technology, seeds are very important. Ms. Wang, I know you're an economist. It may be unfair for me to ask you this question, but things like this, how do you expect China as a developing country, but middle-income country as well, be able to handle it in a more complex situation?
Seed security is a new concept which was raised 2 years ago. And that's compatible with China's agricultural development stage because right now it seems that China cannot rely on increasing industrial inputs anymore. For example, fertilizer or pesticides. In the past, because China apply a lot of those chemical inputs in its agricultural system, it in a way destroyed the soil system, but at the same time it increased the yield. But in the future, it seems that we need to have better seeds in order to have better yields. And in order to reach that goal, protecting the biodiversity has been a major drive in the past 3 years. And we have seen the COP15 in Kunming concentrating on protecting biodiversity by increasing the gene pool. Because in China's R&D in agriculture, a big criticism for the system is that since we don't have a large enough gene pool by a lack of biodiversity, then the research cannot reach the kind of depth that are desired. So now there are tons of state money backing this kind of effort. So it seems that we're at a good start.
Ms. Zhang, the agriculture expert?
Yes, I agree. The first step, if you say that the mapping of the germplasm resources were given great efforts at a national scale. Our university also are doing quite a lot of research on these. In the future, I think that we will have more seeds and try to apply these seeds from the lab to the field is also a very important issue right now. How to speed up this transition period, is very important. I think it's also need to be paid attention to.
How do you think they can be sped up?
Now we have a very good some kind of national system. Like sweet potato system or a wheat system to link the scientists from the university, from the academies to the farmers directly. I think this is a really good system. However, sometimes the resource allocation is very unevenly distributed. I think which juncture should given more resources is a really important issue. More scientific methods needs to allocate these resources to different levels of actors.
The world is changing fast, taking all our lives with it. But we can change it too by seeking answers to problems through discussions and debates. On World Insight, I ask direct questions to real people in the know seek genuine answers, but respect diverse perspectives. Our live global debates tackle the most critical issues head-on. World Insight with Tian Wei go beyond the headlines. Let's continue our discussion about agricultural modernization. Professor Li, I know you are an economist and therefore researching about China's modernization ways for quite some time. Certainly, China is talking about the Chinese modernization, but how is that reflected in agriculture modernization? This word has been used for decades in China.
A strong country is based on a strong agriculture. So that, I think, is the basic logic. And the emphasis put into it is an expression of the emphasis of the central government on agriculture, regardless how urbanized China is going to be and how industrialized China is going to be. So agriculture is going to be an important part of China's modernization drive.
How is this different, likely, from the earlier version of agriculture modernization? I remember there was 4 modernizations decades ago, including agricultural modernization. Of course, the phrase when it's being used today is totally at a different level compared to decades ago. So how should we understand this continuation of the phrase, and yet the quality of modernization are at very different level? Ms. Zhang.
Yes, you are right. Modernization process we're talking today is very different from the previous ones. I think now if we read the No.1 document, we can say the high quality development was emphasized. And that means we need a sustainable, balanced, and inclusive approach to achieve development. This does not only related to agriculture, but also related to rural areas. Yeah, as we know, rural area is very multifunctional, right? It provides food, the biodiversity, entertainment, to not only to job opportunities, not only to rural people, but also to the urban citizens. So if we look at the new document, we can see a holistic approach is being emphasized, especially paid more attention to rural development and integrated this rural development perspective into China's agricultural modernization process.
On that, I would like to quote, according to some media stories coming from excerpts of the No.1 document, to solidify, promote the building of a beautiful and harmonious countryside that is desirable to live and work in, to improve the rural governance system, and also to strengthen policy guarantees and structural and institutional innovation. Of course, these, once again, are big terminologies, but Ms. Wang, whether the young people want to stay in rural area, that's a very practical issue. And whether the life over there is going to be desirable for the younger generation to be able to be more innovative and to create China's rural area to a very different level.
In the past few years, we did notice this kind of reverse migration from large cities to rural areas. There are tons of government subsidies supporting startups in rural China, and some are quite successful. In central and western China, actually the application of drones is even wider spread than coastal China. And that is quite uplifting when we think about only 3 years ago that Xinjiang firstly applied the first drone that can monitor large scale of land and apply pesticides, which can reduce the probability of getting skin cancer for farmers. And when it comes to the online streaming services, it's even more advantageous when we think about what young people can do. And in the Taobao villages, for example, we have been following the research by CCAP, where I did my postdoc in agriculture. So they are tracking more than 4,000 Taobao villages in China, and notice actually only 0.3% of the agricultural sales were done online, but almost all of them were operated by very young people that were recently coming back from cities. Taobao villages are this kind of initiative to use online platform to market agricultural goods for city residents. And in the past 5 years, actually, it took off really drastically, along with the expansion of the main platforms like Alibaba and Tencent. With online streaming of TikTok, that has become even more popular among the younger generation. So more people are using it, but still there's a problem of the wealth distribution because only the best product, the highest value-added product can be advocated there. And you do need someone well-educated and know well of how those apps work to make it work.
This is very crucial because it means where their market is. If it can be all over China, that would be great. They will have a way out, right? Talking about China's modernization, agricultural modernization, I have to mention about a human aspect. Earlier, China has been taking the pride, encouraged by the international community as well, about poverty alleviation. China has achieved a tremendous result, both for the country, for the people, of course, and also for the world to be able to reach the sustainable development goals of anti-poverty. But now, as we know, global economies are suffering from multiple challenges. So are economies everywhere. That includes China. So how to make sure, according to the No.1 document, it also mentioned how to make sure to prevent massive scales of falling back into poverty. These are very crucial points. Now, Professor Li, tell me more about what you have discovered policy-wise related to realities today in terms of that question.
One of the interesting things is the mention of a courtyard economy, which means that households can really start some sort of business around their household. And that is very interesting. I think that is going to provide a kind of a stream of revenue for the for the farmers to really develop another source of income. The other thing I think is the rain and drew plan plus plan, and that is a plan to develop the talents or the technological capabilities of young farmers. I think that is going to also change the traditions of the agricultural development. I think is going to open up new windows of development. That's what I see.
There are tons of infrastructure spending already in place, trying to create more jobs by hiring some of the workers who were previously working in construction or manufacturing industry. And all levels of local governments were also expanding on their employment. And that can at least temporarily provide an income stream for those people. But in the long term, it ultimately still depends on how many jobs can be created in the cities of China. Migrants and migrant incomes are now the main source of farm income. Actually, for a typical agricultural family now, about 3/4 of their income are from non-farm related jobs, not from agriculture anymore.
Professor Zhang, I noticed a very interesting phenomenon that when earlier we were talking about No.1 document, mainly we're focusing just on agriculture itself. But now when we talk about No.1 document, we are talking about, of course, agriculture, but also rural areas, but also the overall China's economic development pace, and at the same time, the international environment. So one thing is for sure that it is so closely linked to what's going on elsewhere in the world and elsewhere in China.
As we mentioned earlier, the international environment currently is very uncertain. China has been one of the largest importers of grains. Most of these grains are used for animal feed, as we mentioned earlier. This, makes our food security to a large extent, reliant on the international market.
Professor Zhang, China's rural area has been such a nurturing land. It not only provides a living for the rural population in China. But over the past decades in China's reform and opening up process, it has provided a falling back, shall I say, soft landing for all Chinese economies, all aspects. But how do we see now the role of rural China today, particularly with the lens of preventing larger scale of population falling back into poverty? How do you look at that?
Actually, as Ms. Wang mentioned earlier, I always call it we are facing a kind of new paradigm shift. That means before a large scale of migrant workers, these migrant workers contribute a lot to China's rapid economic growth. However, these days we can see a reversed trend is that many people would like to go back to rural areas and to start their own businesses. So this may pose a kind of threat for large-scale poverty trap to these people. However, and what we are observing now in rural areas is that rural area in China is kind of release a kind of new potential for economic growth, and the channels of farmers' income has been greatly broadened. We can say, this is first due to some policy encouragement. I can say, to ensure the farmers who grow staple crops, such as rice, wheat, and maize, can benefit. Government provides some minimum purchases prices, subsidies, technology application, incentives, and skill promotion. And also, the other one is the property income. The income generated from the property holding, like land and housing. New approaches are explored to increase these farmers' property income. What we are doing in Yunnan is to turn the vacant homes or rooms of local people into kind of asset that can bring income to the households. We call it a kind of embedded guest rooms. During the peak of tour season, these households can use the guest room to receive tourists and earn income.
Okay, Li Yong, Wang Dan, and Zhang Chuanhong, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for bringing us more lively details about the No.1 document. After all, agriculture really matters. Thank you. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight. Check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for being with us.